All right. Well, it is now my distinct pleasure to welcome our keynote speaker. Jonathan Johnson is currently chairman of Overstock.com, which has had really a meteoric rise over the last decade. I think that there's been some very sound, far-sighted people at the helm of that institution. And as I visited with Jonathan, I was really amazed to learn some of the things that underline the Overstock.com culture. And a lot of it is built around the concept of planning for contingencies, looking at things that may come down the road. And Jonathan, I believe, is going to get into that a little bit more. He's also a declared gubernatorial candidate for the state of Utah. And I believe from what I've heard from him that he wants to bring some of those successful approaches that have been implemented at Overstock.com and implement them from a government perspective for the state of Utah and perhaps for other jurisdictions that will want to emulate successes that we might see. So with that, I'd like to welcome Jonathan, and I hope you'll all join me in giving him a round of applause.
It's great to be here. Thank you for having me. When Gail was introduced as the shadow governor, she said that the governor might not like to hear that. I also know that he does not like to hear that I am running for governor. So that's, and he's let me know that, as have his lieutenants. I'm with a company called Overstock.com. 16 years ago, we started with 18 employees in a room, I don't know, about a third the size of this room. And we started selling liquidation product on the internet. And every time a sale happened, a bell went off, and everybody in the room stood up and clapped. And that first year, we did about $1.8 million in revenue. And like most startups, we lost money. And at that point, we implemented a mantra at Overstock that we still live by today. At Overstock, we save paper clips. And that's both a literal and figurative directive to all of our employees. And if you look in my upper left-hand drawer, you'll see that from all the paper clips I've saved and all the paper clips I've used out of that drawer, I'm a half a drawer net positive on paper clips. Today, we've grown from 18 employees to 1,800 employees. We've grown from 1.8 million in sales to this year, I suspect we'll be about 1.8 billion in sales. A bell no longer goes off with every sale. And the good news is we're in the business of making money, too. I want to talk about a few of the things that Overstock does to plan for the future. And some of them involve gold. And so I thought that you might be interested in that, too. But first, I wanted to talk about what we do every year when we create a budget. Our management team gets together in a room about like this, and every member of the management team is asked to stand in the front of the room, in the well, if you will, and to defend how they did against budget last year. So if our email marketing team was budgeted to spend $50 million and spent $50 million in email marketing, they have to explain why each cent of that $50 million was well spent. And if it was well spent, it's going to be easier to convince the management team the next year to spend that much or more. But in deciding what we spend the next year, we don't ever assume that because last year's budget was $50 million in email marketing spend, that next year's budget is going to be $50 million or $55 million. But that email marketing manager has to explain from dollar one what's to be spent. That's a term that's called zero-based budgeting. I think our government would be much better off doing zero-based budgeting all the time, rather than saying, thank you. rather than saying, hey, we spent a little bit less or we spent a little bit more, so give us exactly the same or more. We do zero-based budgeting. So our management team puts together this budget every year, and it might say something like, we're going to grow our revenue 10%, we're going to grow our expenses 10% to get there, and our bottom line will come out this way. The management team presents it to the board of directors. The board of directors questions the management team whether they think they can do that budget, and ultimately will approve the budget. But at the same time, and this is the important thing for planning, at the same time that the management team submits to the board and the board approves the budget for next year, the management team also presents what we call our DEFCON plan. DEFCON is a military term, and if you're at DEFCON 5, the world is in steady state. You don't need to get out the nuclear launch codes. Everything is just fine. Our financial contingency DEFCON plan is set up this way. If expenses are coming in at or below budget, and revenue is coming in at or above budget, we're in DEFCON 5. The world is in steady state. We can manage to what we've budgeted. But let's say expenses are coming in a little bit above plan, and revenue is coming in a little below plan. Maybe we're 10% off. We call that DEFCON 4. And we decide before we get there, we decide when we're planning, when times are good, what we're going to do when we hit DEFCON 4 in our financial contingency plan. And we'll list specific things that we will do. In DEFCON 4, rather than hire 300 new people in the coming year, we'll cut it down to hire 50 people. And rather than replacing our computers on a 36-month cycle, we're going to stretch it out to a 42-month cycle. You know, and we'll list specific things that we're going to do. And if we're at DEFCON 1, if we're living in 2008 and the financial markets are going to hell in a handbasket, we're going to list out what we will do. This is how much of payroll we'll have to cut. We're going to try and get out of these warehouse leases. But we've decided in good times what we're going to do in bad times. And we learned that from sad experience. Because before we got in the place of putting in a DEFCON financial contingency plan, when things went a little sour, we would usually say, you know what? Sales will come back next month. And we dig our hole a little bit deeper during that next month. We've decided now that rather than dig deeper, we need to start filling the hole when we're in it. It's been a tremendous way to manage our budget, so that when things don't go as well as planned, we don't get snake bit by spending too much. We need to do that better as a government. And when I look at what Utah is doing, we do some of that well. Our legislature recently has put together a model that says what happens if interest rates go up, or if China stops borrowing our printed money, what will happen? And we can see how it affects our budget. That's a nice start. I applaud the legislature for doing that. But every year, Utah, in preparing its annual budget, relies on the federal government for a significant portion of the state's budget. And just to give you a sense of how that's changed over time, 20 years ago, 1995, $1.5 billion of the state's annual budget came from the federal government. Fast forward 14 years, Governor Herbert takes office at the beginning of his 2 terms, and he said, and $2.5 billion of the state's annual budget comes from the federal government. Fast forward 6 years to where we are today, it is now more than $3.5 billion. It's 25% of the state's budget, a little bit more than 25% of the state's budget comes from the federal government. I think we need a DEFCON financial contingency plan for if the federal government decides not to continue funding the states at that level. And I think there are two reasons that could happen. One is a happy reason. One could be, and you can decide if you think which one is more likely. One could be Congress gets its act together, balances the budget, and reduces the deficit. That would be a happy solution. But when it does that, where is it going to cut its expenses? Will it be from debt service? No. We're going to have to keep paying the Chinese the money that we've lent them, or they borrowed from us. Will it be from military and entitlement? Likely not. That leaves a very small pool of where it can cut expenses. The money that the feds give to the states is likely to be at risk. The other scenario, the more likely scenario in my mind, the federal government continues to borrow and print and spend and borrow and print and spend, and we turn into Greece or something akin to it. If that happens, can the states, can Utah rely on 25% of its budget to be funded by the federal government? I think the obvious answer is no. So what do? Here's what I'd like to do. I know we can't turn that $3.5 billion spigot off immediately, nor would we want to necessarily, but we need to trickle it and turn it off over time. Every year, in appropriating for the budget or passing bills, there are bills or appropriations which are new and which rely on ongoing federal funding. I would like, on a prospective basis, for every time we sign up for new, ongoing federal funding, that at the same time we put in place what Overstock does, a DEFCON financial contingency plan. So let's use an example that's been in the news this week. Medicaid expansion. I personally think the Medicaid expansion, Healthy Utah, and Access Plus were recipes to bankrupt this state. But let's assume that they had been passed and we had signed up for another $700 million of federal funding to come into the state for Medicaid expansion. We should only do that saying, okay, what if the federal government's not good for its 90% promise? What if it does like Representative Paul Ryan, who chairs the House Ways and Means Committee, says don't count on the 90%? What if they showed up with only 80%? And that $700 million that we were expecting to be reimbursed turned out to be $630 million. We've got a $70 million pothole we've got to fill. Well, we can anticipate that. And we should decide ahead of time what we would do. Just like Overstock decides ahead of time what we're going to do if sales aren't there. There's a long list of things to choose from. We could say, you know what? We're going to go back on our Medicaid expansion. We're going to go back to normal Medicaid. We could say we're going to increase sales tax by 1%, or whatever the math shows. We could say we're going to take it out of roads. We could say we're going to take it out of education. I'm not advocating for any one of those, but what I am advocating for is careful, thoughtful, foresightful financial planning. Whenever we look to the federal government for more funds, we should say, what will we do when they dry up? And I think it's when and not if. And we continue to look to the federal government for financial funds. In 1982, in February of 1982, President Ronald Reagan had been president for just over a year. And he went as leader of the federal government to speak to a joint session of the Indiana State Legislature, talking to the state. And here's what he said. He said the federal government operates under the outdated and arrogant assumption that states cannot manage their own affairs. Well, if that was true in 1982, it's truer today. Obamacare, Medicaid expansion, Common Core, all of these things are saying states, it's the federal government saying states, we don't think that you can manage your own affairs. It will remain that way until the states prove the federal government wrong. We preach and we practice self-reliance as individuals and as families. It's time we start doing so as a state. And I think we do that by putting in financial contingency plans. That's a business principle that Overstock has that I think applies to government. Let me talk about something else that Overstock does. We are not, if you know anything about Overstock's history, you know that we are not big fans of Wall Street and the big banks, and we don't trust them. We foresaw the financial crisis. We fought against the upcoming financial crisis that happened in 2008, and then it happened. We don't trust the banks still. And we foresee that with QE3 and 4 and QEN, whatever the number is that you can think is big enough, that at some point there is going to be another significant financial crisis. So what do we do as a business so that we will be prepared when that happens? Let me tell you one thing we do that I think is fairly unique. We have about $10 million in gold, mostly precious metal, gold and silvers, mostly the small button-sized coins that we keep outside of the banking system. We expect that when there's a financial crisis, there will be a banking holiday. I don't know if it'll be 2 days or 2 weeks or 2 months. We have $10 million in gold and silver in denominations small enough. We've got some big bricks, I'll admit that. But we have a lot in denominations small enough that we can use for payroll. Thank you. We want to be able to keep our employees paid, safe, and our site up and running during a time of financial crisis. We also happen to have 3 months of food supply for every employee plus one, so an employee plus a spouse or a partner, that we can live on. Now, that sounds pretty miraculous. I will admit, we sell freeze-dried food on our site, so when you want to replenish your basement or whatever is underneath your bed, you can come buy that on Overstock. And so when we say we have 3 months extra food supply, we just keep more in stock than we otherwise would. But we never get so low that we couldn't have our employees fed and paid during a financial crisis. I think that applies right to what UPMA's mission is. It's looking for a way to make gold and silver spendable. One of the things we're going to look at now, the more I've learned from Larry about what you do, is maybe we take our gold and silver buttons, we put them in UPMA, and we say we're going to have credit cards that we're able to give to our employees so they can be spent. Because even a button is going to be too much to buy a block of cheese at Fresh Market during a financial crisis. Anyway. Again, that's the kind of foresight. I think that that's what this legal tender bill that Representative Galvez and others worked on, it's the foresight that Utah needs. I think that we can always agree to this sentence. Utah can do it better. We can do it better than the federal government. We can manage our lands better than the federal government can. We can decide what to teach our children better than the federal government can. We can certainly manage monetary policy better than the federal government can. Utah can do it better. You know, I have to tell you, I've only been an announced candidate for about 8 weeks, and it still catches me by surprise anytime someone interrupts what I'm saying with applause. They never do that when I teach the youth group at church. And so I'm not very good, but I always appreciate it, so thank you. And don't stop if you find something you like. So about a year and a half ago, and I don't know if this is a cryptocurrency group or not. My suspicion is it's not. But I want to talk to you a little bit about, about a year and a half ago, Overstock started, almost 2 years ago, started accepting Bitcoin. And we did it for a number of reasons, and I've learned quite a bit about currencies in general since we did. We did it because we're in the business of making it easier for people to spend their money on our site. And if they want to spend PayPal dollars or credit card dollars or Bitcoin, we wanted that to happen. But as we looked at it, we wanted to figure out what exactly cryptocurrency was. And so I started looking at what are the traits of currency. What gives something intrinsic value that makes it used as a currency? You know, the term salary has its root in the same word as salt, because Roman soldiers were paid their salary in salt. Salt didn't have intrinsic value until it became a currency. Fiat dollars really have no intrinsic value at all unless you look at their trade as a currency. I mean, when I think of fiat dollars, maybe you could burn a stack of them and keep warm for a little bit. But other than that, their intrinsic value, not backed by gold, is nothing. Gold has some intrinsic value, different from currency. It's malleable, it conducts electricity. But when we think of the value of gold, it's not because of those things. It's because of its trade as a currency. Cryptocurrency has some of those traits. So let me talk about it. We'll talk about maybe 10 traits of currency. And when I'm going to talk about, think of 4 different kinds of currency. Think of fiat dollars. Think of gold, like a bar. Then think about gold as legal tender, as UPMA has set it up. Because UPMA has created more intrinsic currency traits than gold actually, as a bar actually has. And then think of cryptocurrency. All of them have pluses and minuses among these traits. A good currency is fungible. It's interchangeable. Well, dollars are that. I'm going to use dollars for fiat currency. Gold is that. Legal tender gold is that, as is a cryptocurrency. They all score pretty high on that trait. The next trait is they're non-consumable. Salt, when it was a currency, had a problem. It was consumable. Got in water and it went away. All 4 of them work pretty well there. Dollars, gold, gold tender, and cryptocurrency. It's easily portable. Well, what does well there? Cryptocurrency does really well. Here's my cryptocurrency right here. My whole bank account's right here. Gold legal tender does really well. You carry your Amex or your debit card now. Gold as a bar, not so good. Not so good. Dollars, better than gold, but still not so good, right? Also, carrying across borders, really lousy, right? You get on a plane with $1 million in a briefcase, you're going to be in trouble, right? You get on a plane with a credit card of gold or your cryptocurrency, you're all right. It's durable. Gold does well there. Gold's really durable. Fiat dollars, poor. I took a tour 2 weeks ago of the Federal Reserve Building, downtown Salt Lake. They told me that the average dollar bill's life, 18 months. 18 months. They're replacing them all the time. No wonder we're printing so much. If we could only just replacement dollars instead of replacement plus new dollars. Cryptocurrency, gold is a legal tender, durable. Highly divisible. Cryptocurrency is really good there. So is gold is legal tender. You can have a big brick of gold, put in your UPMA account, and spend it to buy a Slurpee at 7-Eleven. You could spend it to buy something that costs less than a penny if they would charge that on your card. Gold, the brick, not so good. Dollars, okay. They're okay on being highly divisible. Secure and not counterfeitable. Dollars, not so good. Okay, but not great. Gold, not great. It's counterfeitable. People are fooled by it. But gold, as a legal tender, someone else is taking the counterfeit risk for you. Larry's taking the counterfeit risk for you. When you deposit it with him, you now have non-counterfeit spendable money on your card. Cryptocurrency, thus far, non-counterfeitable. Easily transactable. Dollar bills, pretty easy. You can go to any store and spend them. Gold, not so easy. UPMA gold, really easy. Really easy. In fact, easier today, I learned, than you can use it at places that don't accept Amex. You can use it at a debit card place. Cryptocurrency, kind of. Not, if you want to do all your shopping on Overstock, very easy. If you want to do it elsewhere, maybe not quite so easy. Scarce. Scarce is a true trait of currency. Dollars, not at all. It's fiat money. And it's not capped. That's why we keep printing it. That's what the QE system is. Gold, scarce. Gold is legal tender, scarce. Cryptocurrency, fiat, but Bitcoin is capped at 21 million coins. About 14 million have been mined. Fiat, but fixed cap, so it meets scarce. Here's something else that used to be a positive and now is a negative. Sovereign. Is it backed by a federal government? That used to be a positive, but as we've gone off the gold standard and we've gone on to the print standard, that's a negative. The dollar has a character trait as being sovereign that's a negative. Gold, non-sovereign. It's a plus. Cryptocurrency is a plus. UPMA is a plus. These are things that I think make what you're doing here. You're taking something that had a lot of gold, a lot of things in the plus column, and a few in the minus column, and taking their minus traits and bringing them into the plus column. I think what UPMA is doing and what the Legal Tender Act does are awesome. We're moving over. We're moving away. We're getting to a currency that has more and more and more positive traits. The US dollar has more and more negative traits. So that's who I am. That's what Overstock has done. I'm not going to give my standard stump speech here. I'd answer questions if Larry gives me a little bit on the mic, or I'll do it afterwards. But I do want to say, I want to give another quote from Ronald Reagan. This quote he gave in January '89, his last day in office, just before he left. He had a speech he gave to the nation, a very eloquent speech. And this is what he said. He said, if there's one thing I've learned about Americans, is that all great change starts around the dinner table. Well, we've had waffles tonight. Waffles have been served. I'm not sure this counts as a dinner table, but almost. And what you go home and talk to your families about tonight or around your Sunday dinner table is important, because that's where great change starts. And for people to spend their Saturday afternoon talking about how we can change Utah to be better, how we can make Utah do it better, how we can make America do it better, you are the change agents that we need, and I thank you and I applaud you.